All right, Danielle Palmer, thank you so much for being a guest today on the Holistic Hub podcast. I am so excited to interview you today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, it was really you that reached out to me because you were like, hey, like, I think I should come on and really talk about what I do and, how you're helping people because, this is really like an untouched area is using like frequency and energy as medicine. And we're starting to see more and more people utilizing supports like similar to what you're doing. But again, not really many are doing exactly what you are doing. So I will admit I am not an expert. I don't know a whole lot about what it is we're going to talk about, which is what is so exciting for me. So before we dive into that, would really love to just hear like your story. Like what got you started in all of this?
Well, I've been in this field for about 16 years. And it was funny because, everybody was like, oh, what did you get your major in? And what did you, study in college? And I was doing something completely different. I actually was at Cal State Fullerton in the theater program. So totally 180, from what I'm doing now. But basically my last semester, I was doing the kind of more business, like producing, directing side of theater at that point. And my last semester, I had these two friends. It was a doctor and nurse couple that they were retired, so they were family friends. And the nurse had such bad sinus issues that she went to one of her nurse practitioner friends who just happened to have a SCENAR device. And she was like, let me just try this on you. And so she worked on her for about 15, 20 minutes and her entire lobe cleared. And she was like, what is this thing? And so she told her husband about it. Long story short, they ended up coming out of retirement and opening a practice just to do SCENAR. And they approached me and they were like, hey, I know that you're doing this other thing, but I also know that you've always had an interest in doing something in the medical field. I think you'd be good at this. Would you be interested in working with us? And, I was skeptical, obviously, but I had, my own health journey. And, I was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid when I was 2. I had chronic pain pretty much my entire life. At that point, I had actually been in a car accident about 3 years prior, and I had really bad whiplash, tension headaches every single day, lived on Excedrin tension headache, which is horrible for you, as we know. But it was the only way that I could get through the day, essentially. And so somebody worked on me. And in about 20 minutes, I could move my neck more than I had in years. My tension headache started going away. And I was like, okay, there's something to this. So I went down the rabbit hole, started working with them. And basically from there, flash forward 16 years now, I've studied under all of the greats of frequency medicine. I've studied under Dr. Alexander Revenko, who's the inventor of SCENAR. I studied under Dr. Jerry Tennant, the author of Healing is Voltage. I've studied under Dr. Carolyn McMakin for FSM, and just everywhere that I possibly can all around the world. So that's where we are now.
That's amazing. It's like, it's so beautiful when you hear someone's story. And sometimes when you hear it's just like right time, right place, like just like, interaction with those individuals and then just getting like thrust into the world of frequency medicine. That is so cool. So then to kind of like lay the groundwork for today's conversation regarding frequency medicine, we hear a lot of how like we are electrical beings, like we vibrate at specific frequencies. We hear all these different things. And so like to somebody who is just now hearing this and they're just like, okay, like that's really, really cool. I have no idea what this device is. I have no idea what it means to be electrically charged and to, utilize that in the medicine and the supports that you're utilizing with your own clients. Can you kind of explain what it means to say that we are electrical beings?
Yeah, I mean, everybody always focuses on the biological and chemical aspect of the body, but truly at the very root of everything, it starts with electricity. So, I always love to use the metaphor of think of yourself as a computer. You could have the most amazing computer in the world, but if it doesn't have a charge, nothing's going to work, right? And so every single cell in your body is an electrical thing. And the electrical aspect of that cell actually controls the membrane around the cell. And so if you don't have adequate electricity, then the good things don't get into the cell and the bad things don't get out of that cell. Well, that's inflammation, and that's kind of the root of everything. But also we need that electrical component to stimulate the chemical and biological aspect. So it's the very root of everything. If you don't have electrons, if you don't have electricity, you're not on this planet.
Yeah. Wow. I just had me thinking deeply about that's what I describe to a lot of my clients when I'm working with them when it is, so I specialize in mold illness and mast cell activation syndrome, things that are like driving a ton of inflammation in the body. And I'm always explaining to people when we're under this type of inflammation, your cell membrane starts to become stiff and hard. And then we are not getting nutrients inside the cell and we are not detoxing whatever the heck it is you were getting exposed to, right? And so it sounds like what you're saying is it's so in alignment with what I also work with my own clients is that we really got to figure out what's going on, but also kind of getting to the root of the issue and fixing that so that way the body can start to heal basically at that cellular level.
Exactly. And what you're talking about with mold, so we know that mold, fungus, the C word, all of those things don't like a oxygenated environment. Well, guess what controls oxygen in the body? It's voltage. So in order for, you could have, the pulse ox that they use to measure, right? All that's showing is just oxygen circulating in your blood. But what it doesn't show you is what's actually viable and usable for the body. In order for that oxygen to be able to be usable, you have to have voltage. So voltage controls the oxygen. And when you have low voltage, you have low oxygen. When you have low oxygen, fungus, mold, and parasites like to turn on, and then other things like to come.
So then now that you're bringing up voltage and we've kind of touched on frequency a little bit, like as I was kind of prepping for the interview, I was learning all about voltage and frequency and all these different things. So can you kind of describe then the difference between voltage, what is voltage, what is frequency, and like what is it that our cells like optimally need to operate their best at to function well?
Yeah. So let's take voltage, as the start, right? So voltage, that's the electricity, that's the energy. And people always tend to mix frequency and energy. Those are two very different things. So think of voltage as like the engine of a train. So that's driving you, right? Frequency, it's like the guidance system, making sure that the train's actually getting where it's supposed to go. Right. So we have two very different things. So voltage, number one. So, there's a book, Healing is Voltage, Dr. Jerry Tennant, he wrote that book years ago. And it was really great start because it really popularized the idea that healing is voltage. And he, talked about this theory of basically 20 to 25 millivolts for all the cells in your body. And that's like a very simplified version of what happens. But, we know through, science that every single type of cell pretty much has different charges. So, on average, it's about 40 to 90 millivolts just from what scientific papers say. So neurons, it's about negative 70 millivolts. Skeletal muscle tends to be about negative 85. Smooth muscle, epithelial, it's about negative 40 to negative 60. But those are also measured outside of the body for the most part. So there's a little bit of a difference there. What we're looking at when we're looking at people's voltage overall, we use the Tennant method or the Tennant theory, of that scale of 20 to 25 with what we're measuring because we're looking at the aggregate field potential. So basically that runs about negative 10 to negative 35 millivolts on average. But we want to see somebody healthy, and the healthy people tend to be in that 20 to 25 with the methodology that we're using right now. However, there's a lot of advancements happening in that field where I feel like those assessments are going to be a lot more comprehensive and a lot more accurate in the years to come. That's something that myself and my team are actually working on because it's a great starting point. But I feel like we can get even better at it. So to answer your question, basically, yes, every single cell has a different charge that it needs, right? And that's just that electrical component. But also, if you think of frequency, so frequency is information. Frequency is software, let's just say. So every single structure, every single function in the body correlates with different frequencies. So, let's say like FSM, so frequency specific microcurrent. They talk about, a specific issue, specific tissue, right? So it's kind of like that guidance, that resonance that happens. And when you hit that resonant frequency for that thing, it's talking directly to it. It's tuning to it. So voltage, energy, frequency, information.
Okay. So yeah, because it's kind of like resonance is like what you're referring to with like the frequency. It's like when the two systems can vibrate at like compatible levels. And
exactly.
Okay. And so would that mean like, is that like neighboring systems, or can that even be like separate systems, like skeletal muscle versus like our cardiac like system? Like can it be like, you know what I mean? Like, do they have to be like near each other to be like kind of like within that coherence, or like do we optimally want to see like the coherence like across the board in regardless of if they're near each other or like far away, if that even makes sense?
So yeah, I get what you're asking. And resonance, for those who don't totally get resonance, think of, like two tuning forks. If I had a C, right, a tuning fork that's a C and an A, if I strike the A, nothing's going to happen to the C. Yeah. But if I have a C and a C and I just strike one of them, this other one's going to start vibrating because they're a resonant frequency. So that's resonance for those who don't totally get that concept. But in the body, it's so much more complex than than what we know even now. We've done a lot of research in the field, and there's tons of papers on this. And we're starting to really go down that rabbit hole and open up to the concept that we are this very, very complex frequency being. And I always like to describe it as, you have all these different systems in the body. You have all these different types of cells where they're just one instrument in the orchestra. And then you have your overall coherence, which is, essentially the symphony, right? So we have to have everything playing in harmony. Otherwise, we go into dysfunction, and that tends to throw things off. And it's even harder in the world that we live in today.
Another thing that I'll mention to clients, I talk a lot about this on social media, is the nervous system. And I really want to dive into this with you a little bit later, but I talk about, I'll say it a very similar analogy as you, where I say like with our organs of detoxification, where we've got like our liver, our lymphatic system, our gut, our kidneys, like all these different areas. Like we need them to be they're like the orchestra, but we need the conductor of the orchestra there. And I always say that's our brain, our limbic system is that conductor, where like when it comes to meditation and nervous system regulation, we need to focus on that piece to help support the different areas of the body to help them function well. And it just kind of I'm just finding a lot of similarities between like how I'm telling and talking to a lot of people and how you're probably explaining this as well, because again, our bodies, yes, we don't fully understand everything that is occurring in our body. We are very complex beings, but we are like just scratching the surface and understanding all of this. But it seems very similar to what I'm also explaining to individuals, at least regarding the nervous system and making sure that things are functioning well in the body.
Yeah, and I think honestly, that's after you and I had a conversation about what you do and what I do, when we were talking in person, that's why I was like, oh, this would be such a fun conversation, because there's so much synergy between what we do. So
yeah. Yes, absolutely. So then now we're talking about all this stuff going in the body and how this can be impacted and affecting the voltage and then therefore affecting the frequency and different things in the body. So how are you then actually measuring this with clients?
Yeah, so we do a voltage analysis, and really, so right now what we use phase angle, because we have here at Ascent, we have the in-body 970. We're actually the only non-medical facility in the United States to have this device. And essentially what it does is it's measuring your phase angle, which is the permeability of your cells. But also it gives you a ton of other information as far as inflammation, skeletal muscle mass, adipose tissue, visceral fat, a whole bunch of, good data, right? But we tend to start with looking at the phase angle. And then we also do an analysis that we use something called the MEAD right now. So the MEAD is the Meridian Energy Assessment Diagnostic Machine. And essentially what we're doing is we're looking at the electrical impedance on specific spots. So if you're familiar with meridians are kind of like information superhighways in the body. For a long time, Western med kind of wrote those off as being, Eastern medicine mumbo jumbo, right? But they've actually been able to show that they do exist. They've been able to inject them with dye and show that it goes exactly where the meridian goes.
Cool.
So we're finally catching up to what they knew thousands of years ago, right? So basically what we're doing is we're taking these measurements on these points, and these are key data points for the body. And so what we want to see is we want to see the same kind of electrical conductivity between those 2 points. So if I measure, this point on this side and this point on this side, they should be relatively similar because that's the same meridian. Right. If they're off, then we know that there's something in between that's kind of blocking that. And it shows us the overall energetic corridor, essentially, that somebody's in. So we want to see everybody's readings be in kind of this normal zone. What I tend to see is I see some that are way high, really stressed, and then way low, so this is very, very skewed. We use that as just a baseline, just to kind of see what overall is happening in the system. But the true test and the true diagnostic is something that Natalie Sakamoto, my business partner, and myself, she was kind of the mastermind behind taking all of this information and putting it into the system. And so I have to give her the credit for that. She was phenomenal. But essentially what we've done is created this diagnostic where we go through and we figure out, okay, which circuit of the body is turned off? Why is it turned off? And what is it affecting? So basically what that means, if you think of your body as a house, let's just say, if your kitchen circuit was turned off, then your stove, your dishwasher, your refrigerator, all those things wouldn't really be working very well. Right. The body works the same exact way. We just don't think about it that way. And Western medicine tends to tell us, oh, your refrigerator's off. Your microwave is having a problem. Your dishwasher's having a problem. These are all different things. We're like, it's the kitchen. What are you talking about? So it's all the same. And so at the end of this diagnostic, essentially our clients, and our patients get to see, oh, wow, I see where all of these things that have happened through my life hit that same exact circuit. No wonder I'm having all of these problems now, because all of these problems are not all of these problems. They're all one, because they're all on the same circuit. Yeah. So that's kind of how our analysis starts, let's just say.
That is really cool. And so, okay, so we talked about voltage, the energy, we've talked about frequency, the information. So can you describe a little bit more about the circuits and like how many, do we have a certain amount of circuits in our body? Are there so what exactly do the circuits mean?
Yeah, so essentially, basically this whole concept, again, it's taken from all these different aspects of health. So if we think of anatomy trains, fascia. Mm-hmm. Well, fascia is actually kind of like the wiring network of the body, interestingly enough. So fascia is conductive. It's made from, collagen, which is a semiconductor. And so your muscles, right? So muscles kind of act as this rechargeable battery, because every time they're moving, they're crunching down on fascia, which is creating electricity. And then fascia is the wiring network. Mm-hmm. And what they've found is essentially that there's these very specific muscles linked to very specific structures in the body. So we have the battery packs, and then we have the structures that it's powering. And so you have about 12 of these in your system. And so we've been able to map and essentially correlate, and Dr. Tennant, again, I have to, give him credit for taking all this information and putting it together, right? So it's from, anatomy trains, it's from Eastern medicine, it's from, there's a book by Becker who wrote about a lot of this stuff, but, putting it together, essentially there was, he called, his version was bioterminals. We've kind of switched things up a little bit of what we've found, because in clinic we've done thousands of these and we've found various differences. So in these circuits, we found that there's about 12, and they have very common problems. When you have, one particular circuit off, people tend to have the same exact problems. And so basically these circuits, it's just like the powering system of your body. So when something gets damaged, when that circuit gets damaged, when the wiring gets cut, let's just say through, a surgery or an injury, dental has a lot to do with it. Toxins, T3 thyroid function overall, has a lot to do with it, but also emotions, so all those things, the EMFs, all that plays a role in our health. And so what we find is people's problems. They tend to get one little chink in the armor and then another little chink in the armor. And then they had that surgery and then they happen to have that root canal, and it's all in the same circuit. And no wonder they're having all the problems now.
Right. That was going to be my next question, was kind of diving into what then can interfere with the wiring of the circuit. You have the best analogies, by the way. I have to say, I really like them. I'm following along great, and I was worried I wasn't going to be able to. So thank you for that. But yes, so it sounds like toxins. It sounds like you said like bad dental work, or just like, an infection in the mouth from like a root canal that's just been there for a long time. I'm assuming nervous system dysregulation, which we know a lot of other things in our environment can trigger that. So then when, let's say somebody, has had this history of things that have happened to them, potentially even current things that are happening to them, like maybe they're still living in mold, or they're getting high exposure of EMFs from somewhere in their environment, whatever it is. So then, one, what are we doing then to help this person rewire that circuit? What is the technology, and what are you doing to help with that? And then simultaneously, can you see benefits even if somebody might still be getting some form of an exposure? Like what are you instructing your clients through in that piece? Because ultimately, if there's still some form of toxin exposure they're getting, I'm assuming that obviously would need addressing as well. So it seems like you're doing a pretty deep dive into their history, past, and then obviously current, to make sure that, you're checking all the boxes and getting this person better.
Yeah. We work as a team, with their provider. I very much view health as a, 360 approach, right? It takes
Same.
So we all work together, so essentially the things that we look at, number one, doing that diagnostic, is we're seeing what's there, but also we're seeing what's not there. So I see various patterns with people where I am pretty gosh darn positive that person probably has a mold issue. I'm not obviously going to diagnose that, but I'm going to go, you should probably go see this person. And they should do, just ask about these things, because they're going to do that piece of it, because I don't do that piece of it. Right. But basically what we're looking at is, okay, so we see you have scars. All right. So number one, we need to make sure that we can patch those scars. So how we do that, we actually use Synergy's biomodulator. It's a device that uses microcurrent, frequency, but also it has this attachment, this piece called the transducer. And essentially it's using scalar, PEMF, light, and frequency. And basically it's delivering these healing frequencies into that scar tissue, because scar tissue is not conductive. And so it's really hard to get things into scar tissue. And so because of the scalar aspect and the PEMF, we're able to bypass kind of that resistance, let's just say, to just microcurrent. And so we're able to get that frequency into the scar tissue to just kind of start opening that up. And as I said, I'm a skeptic about everything. I literally test everything before I bring it in. So when somebody showed me this years ago, and I mean, my friend, my very good friend, actually, she was the one who actually showed me a biomodulator and transducer for the first time. This was probably in like 2018, and probably 2018, actually, because I was already familiar with Tenet, and all this, all these things. And so she showed me this thing, and I was like, what? Like, what is this?
Gosh.
So I actually tested it, because we were talking about incorporating it. And so I test everything. So I, would measure somebody's scar with another device with my SCENAR, because I could see the reaction of, what was happening on the scar. And then I would treat it with, the biomodulator and transducer, and then I'd measure again, and it would be through the roof. And I was like, okay, this is doing something. So I started working with it, and we've actually been able to see a good change with people's scars. But essentially, it's not about changing the look of the scar, which, I mean, it does happen sometimes, as we're working on scars, but that's not what it's about. It's about patching the wiring and making it conductive again. So that's one of the pieces that we can do, right? So we work with that tissue just to kind of get it flowing, get that electricity able to go through it again. We also work with, things like recharging, right? So once you patch all the holes, then you have to get things flipped back on, and then you have to get charged back up. And so that's our other role, is we again use Synergy's biomodulator and biotransducer, because the transducer is going to help flip polarity and give your body something to harmonize to, because that frequency that we're using for that is the Schumann resonance, which is the Earth's natural frequency, which we don't get anymore in today's day and age. So your body naturally wants to tune to that, because that very much correlates with our DNA. And so by doing that, getting everything flipped back around and turned back on, all those batteries flipped around the right way again, let's just say, then we can put charge into the system and it's actually going to hold.
Okay.
So step 1, patch all the holes. Step 2, flip everything back around, turn it back on, get you charged back up. And then we can do sessions, with like Natalie and I are also our technician, Christina. We work with clients actually rewriting software, let's just say. Okay. So that's where we, use SCENAR, the biomodulator, and we're doing hands-on work with, certain muscles, certain actions in the body. I personally work with a lot of people who've had very, very bad diagnoses, let's just say, things like stage 4 cancer, ALS. I'm not treating those things, but I'm helping that client. And so we see some pretty phenomenal things. So that's kind of the process. And then whatever I don't do and we see, obviously we're going to refer out. So biological dentistry, to a practitioner, emotions, things like that.
Oh, wow. So when you were talking about biomodulator, you were mentioning quite a few of my favorite things, actually. We were talking about light therapy, and then you were talking about PEMF, because I use a PEMF mat every single day. I'm a big fan of red light therapy. So one of the EMF protection devices that I use actually utilizes scalar energy. I don't know if it's the same thing, but its mechanism is meant to not block EMF, but actually provide this like protective coating to our cells and our body. Okay, so this is so cool. So no, that is pretty amazing. So, okay. So then with the biomodulator, I'm curious then, so as you're obviously doing the assessment, figuring things out, is so cool what you talked about with scar tissue, by the way. I am actually so glad you brought that up, because I heard you in a podcast talking about scars, and my understanding of that is how it does interfere with something in our fascia, in our system, and the connection and the communication in our bodies. So very cool to hear what you do regarding that piece. What does the biomodulator device look like? Is it like a big... Is it big? Is it like a machine you sit under? Is it like a small machine that you're placing on someone's skin? Like, what can you describe a little bit more of the process of that?
It's actually small, and it's little handheld. I should have brought it in with me so that I can show you.
Oh, good.
Grab it if you want me to. It's right over there. But basically, it's this little handheld device that outputs microcurrent and frequency, and it's using the magic behind it, though, is the signaling. And so if there's 2 components of it. So there's this little, handheld device that's the actual biomodulator, and that's the brain behind it. And then their attachment, which is the transducer, kind of looks like a tube, essentially. And so the biomodulator by itself, it's outputting microcurrent, frequency, and then its signaling is actually very, very close to our body's own action potential impulse, which is the nervous system signaling. And the magic behind it is that it has this kind of conversation that happens in the body. So there's a biofeedback component to it, where that signaling is changing constantly. Okay. And so where other things are just kind of talking at the body, this is actually having a 2-way conversation. Wow. And so that's kind of the magic behind that. But when you connect it to the transducer, it's a different delivery system. So instead of microcurrent, now all those frequencies are being delivered via PEMF and scalar. Okay. And scalar is a very interesting thing, because scalar permeates through everything. Wow. You can put a sheet of metal in front of it, it'll go right through it, because it's a flat wave. It's actually a field. It's not even a wave. So scalar is a very, very interesting thing. And scalar by itself has been shown to have some pretty incredible benefits.
That's cool. I really love how you also had touched earlier on just like we vibrate and we're supposed to be in that coherence with nature. Like that is what, and like we're just now all living in concrete buildings. We don't ever get out in sunlight anymore. We spend 90% of our times indoors. That's a proven statistic. And so we're not getting outside sunlight, all these different things. And so it's really cool to hear about how it's rebalancing and bringing that body back to like homeostasis in a way of just like supporting the body through everything it's been through. So something I want to ask as well is when it comes to like the dental stuff. So like, will you use that like on the outside of like some ways, like where like specifically like they had maybe like that root canal done or, you know, a poorly crowned tooth? That was actually my issue, where I got an infection and then I had to go see our same biological dentist where yeah, the best. Dr. Fala, shout out.
Yeah, Dr. Fala, you're amazing. Go to him, everybody. He's awesome.
Yes, absolutely. And fixed me right up. But so you'll use that device for like around the skin there as well? Okay.
Yes. Cool. Yeah. And he actually uses that device in clinic. I don't know if you knew that or not. So he
I did not.
Later, and he's used it for a long time. Biomodulator, really? The transducer. Yeah, it really helps his patients. And
that's amazing. I'm not surprised. I'm surprised he's using. He stays on top of the latest research. That's amazing.
It's true.
Yeah. So then, can you talk a little bit more? You've been talking about the SCENAR device. I hope I said that right. Can you describe what that stands for? Can you go into a little bit more detail with that, and like in the cases that you're like particularly using that as well? And like, are you using the biomodulator and the SCENAR device typically like both, in with each individual, or are there some cases where like you're not using both at the same time?
So I utilize both very frequently, but so basically SCENAR was kind of the original device. So that was actually developed in the late 70s by 3 Russian scientists, Dr. Alexander Revenko, Dr. Yuri Gorfinkel, and Alexander Karasov. And 2 have passed, but Dr. Alexander Revenko is still alive, and that's who I was trained by. As well as Natalie. Natalie was trained by him as well. Friends with him, with his family, Galina, his wife, Lena, their daughter, amazing people.
Awesome.
And basically that device, that was the original. So that was, from that device came a ton of other devices. Biomodulator was influenced by that device. Denos was another one. PhysioKey is another one. Cosmotic. There's a whole bunch of different devices that came from that one. And basically, Dr. Revenko and Yuri Gorfinkel were the ones who actually figured out how to actually apply it to the body to make it a therapeutic device. So you had the engineer. Engineers are good at being engineers, right? But you need somebody that actually can take that and understand how to apply it.
For sure.
So SCENAR, it's kind of like the OG. So that's been around for a really long time. That's what I've been doing for 16 years. And a lot of these devices you can use a very similar way. So biomodulator, I use the same way that I would my SCENAR device. There's ways that I still work with SCENAR and I work with biomodulator. It just kind of depends on what I'm trying to do. There's things that I can do with the biomodulator that I can't do with SCENAR. Mm-hmm. But there's also some things that I still like about SCENAR, in treatment, where I can choose, kind of specific frequencies. And I always describe them as basically SCENAR is kind of like the manual drive, and then biomodulators like the automatic. So sometimes I like to, get my manual mode. But they're very similar devices. It's just the biomodulator is kind of like the next gen, I would say. Okay. So yeah, a lot of enhancements in the field.
Well, it's very cool because you're very versatile. So you didn't stick with one method. You can use multiple, different things for that individual that might need it, which is really important to stay on top of things. I love that. So are there certain conditions that may respond best to, like you've seen, like just respond like very quickly to these therapies? Or is it just like a matter of that person and like how deeply inundated they are with like whatever it is that it affected them and how often they might need like sessions and things like that?
I mean, it really depends on the person. I always tell everybody, I'm like, give it a few sessions, you're going to know whether it's a good fit or not. Most of the time it is. I've seen
Cool.
everything over the years from sports injuries to, I work with a lot of ALS and stage 4 cancer patients. Obviously, I'm not treating those things, but,
Right.
I'm helping to support.
Yes.
So the things that just happened are easier than the things that have been going on for a really long time. So, for instance, about 10 years ago, I had a soccer player who came off the field with probably a pretty bad torn meniscus, and we were able to get him right away, work on it, and back on the field about 3 days later, totally fine.
You're kidding.
Yeah, because if you, and studies have shown that if you can get microcurrent and frequency on an injury within about 4 to 6 hours of it happening, you're going to mitigate the majority of that inflammatory process and isolate the problem to just where the problem is, instead of allowing it to, turn into this huge thing. And so by doing that, it's a lot less for the body to deal with, and it's able to heal a lot faster. But also you're kind of using the body's own, mechanism. So by getting this current and getting this instruction on that place and saying, hey, let's fix this, right? Microcurrent is mimicking your body's own electricity. Well, what happens when we get a wound? We get a wound current. That's what happens, and so that's what brings all those little healing mechanisms to that area. So we're giving the body that wound current and saying, come here, fix it. Let's do it now. And so by doing that and by triggering the release of all these little neurochemicals, which is what these devices do, because they're, speaking through the C fibers, right, and influencing that chemical cascade. By doing that, we're able to get that injury usually pretty quick. No promises, but usually the faster we can get to it, the easier it's going to resolve. Now, the things that have been going on for a really long time, it depends. So, I had somebody with neuropathy, severe neuropathy, for 16 years.
Wow.
After chemo. And it was like horrible pins and needles every single day. They weren't getting chemo. They didn't have anything that was still affecting their system. Their system was just stuck in this mode, essentially. So 5 sessions and going and basically giving the body, kind of a new habit, let's just say, because it was stuck in this habit. And I'm saying, no, that's not right. Do this instead. It corrected. Still doesn't have a problem. Great. So 16 years, suddenly, boom, no neuropathy. Because there was nothing in the system that was still hurting it. However, if I have somebody, let's say, with neuropathy and they have type 2 diabetes, that's still a problem because you still have something that's influencing and hurting, the body constantly. So that's a lot harder, but you can still mitigate and help that individual because you're kind of holding back the tide while we correct these other things.
Again, another alignment. So this really what you were talking about with that client with the 16 years of neuropathy and then it's not going through chemo anymore, but the side effects, right? Of the body being stuck in that same cycle. It's very similar to when somebody gets like a toxin exposure and they've removed themselves from that exposure, but their body is in what Dr. Robert Navio discusses, and maybe you've heard, is called the cell danger response model, where the cell still thinks that it's in danger. So all these different pathways have become upregulated, downregulated as a protective mechanism. It's there to keep us alive. But as a result, we have these symptoms that occur and make us feel terrible. And so we feel like our bodies are failing us when in fact they're just stuck in that mode or that constant cycle of thinking it still needs to protect us. And it sounds like what you're doing is what these devices are doing, these therapies are really helping to like rewire that piece and like fix that. Yeah. So that's pretty incredible. And that's another thing too, that's so cool to learn about, because I'm always looking for different modalities that can help get some of my clients just out of that response. Cause in some cases, like it's really hard to implement, even with deep nervous system work, even with certain supplemental supports, like at the smallest doses, some people are just not responding. And like, there's different supports that can be utilized. So how, like what you're doing. So how many practitioners are actually utilizing these devices in the country or outside of the country, I guess?
It's a good point that you bring up. So the sad thing is, but there's a silver lining. So in Europe, so I did most of my training over in the UK. And so, I'm back and forth between the UK and here multiple times a year. But In the UK, there's a pretty decent amount of SCENAR therapists. The EU as well, pretty decent amount of therapists, but, it kind of depends on their background, right? That some of them are, physiotherapists, some of them are doctors, some of them are just, alternative practitioners. So there's a bunch here in the States, unfortunately. So Natalie and myself are the only two from the Russian Academy that have been trained by Revenko here in the United States. So aside from his daughter. Right. So she doesn't count. Sorry, Lena. No, but so aside from Lena, literally Natalie and I, we're the only two that were actually trained by him. There's various practitioners, like random practitioners here in the States that do use SCENAR. And I always tell everybody, I'm like, if you can find one, go try it because, it can't hurt you. So, great. Yeah. I don't know who they were trained by. I don't know their background. And what I find, unfortunately, over the years is that a lot of the practitioners here, they're like a chiropractor that maybe kind of happens to use SCENAR or, a physio that maybe happens to kind of use SCENAR, or they have a biomodulator, but they don't really They do parts of it, but they don't really fully implement it, into their practice. So that being said, this is the silver lining. So Natalie and I I've been looking at this problem for years, and it has been the thorn in my side. So Natalie, I just have to brag about her for a second. She has been a neuromuscular therapist for 25 years. She taught at the top school in the country. She ran the school for 5 years. She was actually my principal when I went to go do my advanced neuromuscular program. She was my principal. That's how we met. And so she's phenomenal. And she learned SCENAR and picked it up faster than anybody that I've ever worked with. And what we've done and what we've been working on, and actually it's releasing in December, we have a practitioner program. We've partnered with Synergy for the biomodulator. And we are creating an entirely new specialty because I'm not just a SCENAR therapist. I'm not just a biomodulator therapist. I'm not just a neuromuscular therapist. I'm all of these things. And that doesn't exist. And so we have coined the term biofrequency specialist. It's being trademarked as we speak. So putting it out there. But basically, we have coined that term because that specialty doesn't exist. And so we have created a program. It's the International Biofrequency Association. And we are going to do an entire certification program, not just teaching how to do the biomodulator, but teaching the entire foundations of frequency healing as a whole. So people are going to understand how all of these things play together, why it all works, how it all works with the body, and have a good solid foundation so that they can educate their clients and they can actually help them to the best of the ability of these devices. So we're super excited about that.
Wow, that is amazing. I'm glad there's a silver lining. But I do remember when I met you earlier this year that you were telling me about this course that you were creating. And then I knew, and of course it takes time. So I'm so happy to hear that it's, it's been in the works, and it sounds absolutely amazing. So I cannot wait to hear about it. And when it is out, I'll make sure to let me know because I would absolutely love to promote it for you. But so wonderful. So a couple other questions I want to ask you before we go ahead and, kind of end the conversation. But we've been kind of touching a little bit here and there on the nervous system. And, that is such a big thing for anybody going through anything, any hard times, any toxin exposures, whatever the case may be. And we know our nervous system is one of the areas that gets so deeply dysregulated from these things, and just life in general. We're just, it's like life is just a stress bucket. So, how does these supports help with the vagus nerve? Can you directly support the nervous system in these ways?
Yes. That's one of my favorite aspects about these devices. And actually what's really cool. So part of kind of the daily routine with the biomodulator, for example, is actually resetting the vagus nerve. Now, there's tons of vagus nerve stimulators out there, and things on the market, but a lot of those, they're just sending something at you. Like I said earlier, this is actually having a two-way conversation. Yeah. And so what's so nice about it is, instead of me blasting you and, saying, hey, change, the body thinks that it's talking to itself. So it's less resistant. And because it's adapting constantly, it tends to bring it back to homeostasis a little bit better, actually a lot better. And so that's something that we work on all the time, because the vagus nerve is so influential, as you know, right?
Yeah.
With just everything in your body, your digestion, your heart, your inflammation, it's basically the connection from the brain to the body, and back and forth, right?
Yeah.
But that is one of my favorite aspects about these devices, because I can take somebody in a sympathetic mode and get them down into a parasympathetic mode pretty gosh darn quick. And there's actually a synergy. Again, I love how they are constantly pushing the boundaries. They are actually working with a doctor to actually show in studies, and they've been able to show actually in the past too, but now even more so, show in studies the change that just in a few minutes doing that with that device does for your nervous system. It's pretty amazing. So
that is so amazing, because when you can activate the parasympathetic nervous system and get it more into that dominant state, I mean, it's so amazing what else just occurs in the body as a result. Like our detox organs can work efficiently. We have better gut motility. We have so much going for us. So that is really cool to hear about how it like directly like supports the nervous system. So my final question for you before, people can learn where they can find you and things like that is, what are other things that people can do right now if they, don't live here in Southern California, they can't come see you. What can they do to maybe support their cells, their circuits in their body, these different things, obviously aside from like reducing toxin exposure and things like that, but are there like other modalities or supports like you might recommend for anybody that's listening right now and they're like, well, I want to start supporting my body, but I can't go see her right now. So what can I do?
Yeah, no, there's a ton of things, and I always like to say the reason why these technologies are so needed nowadays is because we have a deficiency in nature. We're not in nature as much as we should. So getting out in nature is very, very healing, right? If you can, right? But also things like grounding can be incredible because, at least then we're getting a little piece of the puzzle. It's not quite as powerful as, the devices that we're using in clinic. Or, there's a lot of my clients that end up getting biomodulator at home, or they'll get other technologies at home. And that's part of what we do is we do consultations, because I'm not about like, oh, buy all these things. I'm just like, okay, what do you need? What do you actually need? Like not, all these things. That's not, but a lot of people end up getting a biomodulator at home and they use it every day, to support their systems. Some people get grounding mats. Some people get low power PEMF. I use the Beamer. We use the Beamer in clinic. But also just free things, moving. The more you move your muscles, the more you are recharging your batteries. So, if you're not moving, you're not recharging yourself. Getting out in the sunlight, influencing that chemical cascade in the body. So, seeing that morning light in the morning, that does so much for your system. Seeing the evening light, that does so much for your system. Turn off your phone before you go to bed. Get it out of your bedroom. Because that absolutely disrupts your melatonin production and you're not going to heal. So, just get it away. Doing things like EMF mitigation. There's a bunch of different devices out there. I haven't totally committed to supporting one. Right now, I'm currently testing AIRS, and they have some pretty decent, science behind it, but I'm not sold completely. I'm a very, very hard sell. So, I test everything, but like doing EMF mitigation things are great. I have a EMF case on my phone, so this blocks EMF. But yeah, just things like that, little micro changes that you can do, every day. Ground, get out in nature as much as you can, drink good quality water, do good quality supplements, things like that.
Danielle, that was This was so informative. This was so exciting to learn about. I know everyone that is going to be listening to this is going to absolutely find this so fascinating and just so cool to just learn about another supportive therapy that could be that great like adjunct to like their treatment and supports like from whatever they're dealing with from their lifetime built up of things that have occurred to them possibly, right? And so thank you for like shedding light on this topic. Very excited again for your course coming out. I cannot wait to share that and explore that with the audience. So last question is, where can people find you if they wanted to work with you? Like, where can they look you up and also follow you on social?
Yeah. So on social, I'm at The Frequency Therapist. And then I do have a website. It's frequencytherapistofficial.com. I'm also here in clinic at Ascent Adaptation and Regeneration in Costa Mesa. So you can always find me with them. And that's kind of my main hub, my main home. I do sessions as well at a place called Helixana that just opened here in Irvine. It's an integrative clinic, but we're helping to bring the energetics department too. So you can always find me both of those places. But yeah, hit me up on social at The Frequency Therapist and my website.
Awesome. Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you.